Then you'll get nothing. My son spat at me across the Father's Day dinner table, and with those 3 words the boy I'd raised officially declared me dead. The insult, so raw and so final, hung in the air between us, sharper than the steak knife still resting in my hand. The low hum of the exclusive Miami steakhouse, the clinking of distant glasses, the murmur of other people's happy celebrations. It all faded into a dull, roaring silence in my ears. All I could see was the contempt on my own son's face. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and tell us where you're listening from. The whole ugly scene unfolded at the Capitol Grille's downtown, a place I'd taken him to celebrate his college graduation. It's a classic temple of American success. All dark mahogany, polished brass, and portraits of stern-looking men. A place where fortunes are made and families are celebrated. The irony felt like a physical weight. The evening had begun with a brittle, exhausting charade of civility. My son Leo and his wife Chloe were there in body, but their minds were clearly elsewhere. I tried to bridge the chasm between us, talking about a new zoning deal, about the grandkids' last school report. Leo just nodded, his eyes scanning the room as if looking for someone more important. He kept tapping his fork against his plate, a nervous, irritating rhythm that betrayed his impatience. Chloe was a study in predatory stillness. She watched me over the rim of her wineglass, her smile as thin and sharp as a razor wire. I've dealt with killers in the boardroom my whole life. People who would slit your throat for a percentage point. The look in her eyes was worse. It wasn't business, it was personal. I saw it then. I wasn't a father-in-law to her. I was the dragon guarding the treasure she believed was already hers. The breaking point arrived with the precision of a guillotine after the main course plates were cleared. Leo folded his hands on the table, a gesture of rehearsed gravity. "Dad," he began, his voice dropping into a register of feigned sincerity. "Chloe and I have been thinking a lot about the future, about your future." He slid a heavy dark blue leather folder across the table. It stopped just short of my water glass with a soft, definitive thud. It wasn't a birthday card, it was an execution order. My hands felt strangely heavy as I opened it. The leather was cool and smooth, the kind you'd find binding a multi-million-dollar contract. Inside, there was no preamble, no thoughtful letter, just a single stark sheet of heavy bond paper. At the top, in a cold, impersonal font from a law firm I'd never heard of, were the words "transfer of controlling interest." As my eyes scanned the dense legal text, the world tilted on its axis. It was a complete and total abdication. My entire 51% controlling stake in Westwood Properties, the company I had started with a second mortgage and 40 years of my own sweat, was to be signed over to Leo for the insulting sum of $1. My life's work, my retirement fund, my legacy. As I read the words, a memory flashed through my mind, so vivid it made me ache. Leo, age 6, on the lawn of our first real house in Coral Gables. I was teaching him to ride his first two-wheeler, my hand on the back of the seat, running behind him, shouting, "You've got it, son, you've got it. I built this entire empire for that boy." The man sitting opposite me with ice in his eyes was a stranger. "We are calling it succession planning," Leo said, his voice smooth as poison. "It's sessions time. You sessions earned your rest." The word rest sounded like grave. I glanced at Chloe. The faint, triumphant smirk playing on her lips confirmed everything. This was a coup planned in my own home and executed over a birthday steak. My heart hammered against my ribs, a slow, heavy drumbeat of betrayal. I took a slow, deliberate breath, forcing the tremor out of my hands. I looked at my son, really looked at him, and I saw past the expensive suit and the confident posture. I saw the weakness, the greed, the desperate need to have without earning. And I knew this was not a negotiation. It was a mugging. I closed the folder, the soft slap of leather on paper sealing my decision. I would not break. I would not yell. I would not give them the satisfaction. "The answer is no, son," I said. My voice perfectly level. I said, "I'm not signing away my life set up as work on the back of a dinner reservation." And that's when he snapped. The civilized mask shattered. He threw his napkin on the table, his face flushing a deep, ugly red. "Fine," he spat. the word cracking like a whip. Then you still get nothing. He leaned across the table, his voice a low, venomous hiss. You understand me? No respect, no phone calls. You will never see your grandkids again. You'll be a ghost, and I'll take the company anyway. I'll bleed it dry with expenses. I'll leverage it to hell. I'll run it into the ground if I have to. Either way, it ends with me in charge. This was your one chance to get out with your dignity. He and Chloe stood in unison, a united front of greed. They turned and walked away, weaving through the crowded restaurant, without a backward glance, leaving me in the wreckage. I sat there for a long time, the folder still in front of me. The sounds of the restaurant slowly seeped back in. Laughter from a nearby table, the sizzle of a steak, a cork popping. It all felt like it was happening on another planet. A moment later, the waiter, with practiced discretion, placed the check in a small black folder on the table. I opened it. $812.41. I looked at the itemized list. The $90 bottle of Cabernet they'd insisted on. The lobster appetizer Chloe had barely touched. It was the final petty twist of the knife. They hadn't just tried to steal my future. They made me pay for the privilege of watching them do it. Staring at the bill, a cold, hard clarity washed over me. This wasn't just a betrayal. It was a declaration of war, and my son had no idea who he was fighting. My son's threat, "You'll get nothing," was a repeating drumbeat in my head on the long drive from the restaurant. Each syllable was a hammer blow against the very foundation of my life. The neon glow of Miami blurred past the windows of my car, a city I had helped build, but tonight it felt like a foreign country. I couldn't face the cold, minimalist silence of my high-rise condo, a place of glass and steel that suddenly felt like a cage. My hands, acting of their own accord, steered the car away from the glittering coast and into the quiet, tree-lined streets of Coral Gables. I drove to the one place that had ever truly felt like home, the old two-story house where I had raised him. This house was the first thing I ever bought with my own money, long before there was a Westwood Properties or a multi-million-dollar portfolio. I'd poured the concrete for the patio myself. I'd painted every room twice. This house wasn't just a property. It was my pension, a tangible symbol of every risk I'd taken and every sacrifice I'd made. Now, as I parked at the curb, its darkened windows looked like vacant eyes, staring back at me with an air of accusation. The key felt heavy in my hand as I unlocked the front door. The air inside was thick with the scent of dust and stale memories. I walked through the familiar rooms, my footsteps echoing in the profound silence. This was a ghost tour of a life that was no longer mine. In the hallway, I ran my fingers over the pencil marks on the door frame, a faded ladder marking Leo's growth from a small boy to a young man. Leo, age 5. Leo, age 9. Leo, age 14. I remembered lifting him up, his back pressed against the wood, the feel of his hair against my chin. It was a sacred ritual, a chart of our love. Now it just looked like evidence of a crime. I saw the faint dent in the living room wall, a permanent scar from an errant baseball throw when he was 12. I remembered being furious, and then I remembered us patching it together, laughing, my anger melting away as it always did. Every single happy memory was now tainted, poisoned by the knowledge of how the story ended. I didn't sleep. I just sat on the old living room couch as the sun came up, the grief of physical weight pressing me down. It was Monday morning. Force of habit, muscle memory from 40 years of work made me pull out my phone to check my Westwood email. I typed in my password. A loading icon spun for a moment, and then a message appeared in stark red letters. Access denied. Your credentials have been revoked. A cold dread trickled down my spine. It had to be a mistake, an IT glitch. Leo was angry, but he couldn't. Denial is a powerful anesthetic. I showered, put on the clothes I'd worn the night before, and drove to the Westwood Tower downtown, the gleaming centerpiece of my empire. I pulled into the private executive garage, the same one I'd used every single day for 15 years. I held my keycard up to the sensor. Instead of the familiar friendly green blink, a single brutal red light lit up, followed by a harsh robotic buzz. Denied. He'd already locked me out. I sat there in my car, the engine off, in the dim light of the parking garage. The red light from the card reader glowed on my dashboard like a warning. It wasn't an IT glitch. It wasn't a fit of temper. This was a premeditated, systematic erasure. Leo must have had this all lined up before he even sat down for dinner. The lawyers, the IT department, building security. He had weaponized my own company against me. The betrayal was so absolute, so cold-blooded that the floor of my world simply gave way. For a full day, I ceased to function. I drove back to the house in Coral Gables and stared at the walls. The grief so heavy it felt like a terminal illness. He didn't just want the company, he wanted me gone, wiped from the corporate records and the family history books. He wanted to erase the fact that I had ever existed, and as I sat there in that silent, empty house, I felt like he had already succeeded. There's a point where grief becomes so heavy it can't be carried anymore. For 48 hours it had been a suffocating weight, pressing me into the dusty furniture of that old house, drowning me in the silence. But on the third morning something shifted. The sorrow didn't vanish, but it began to crystallize, condensing from a debilitating fog into a single hard point of diamond-sharp resolve. The part of me that was a father was still bleeding, but the part of me that had built an empire from nothing was starting to wake up. He had mistaken my love for weakness, an unforgivable error. I stood up from the couch, my back aching. I walked through the house one last time, not as a mourner, but as a general surveying a battlefield he was about to abandon for higher ground. I packed a single carry-on bag with the essentials. I was shedding my old life like a snake sheds its skin, leaving the ghosts of my past behind for them to haunt. I locked the door to the Coral Gables house and didn't look back. I drove south, past the familiar skyline of Miami, feeling the city's pull recede in my rearview mirror. I didn't head for the airport or some anonymous hotel. I took the Rickenbacker Causeway toward Key Biscayne, the blue-green water of the bay glittering on either side. But instead of following the main road, I took a sharp, unmarked turn onto a private causeway, one that doesn't appear on any public map. A high-tech security gate slid open silently as my car approached, recognizing my license plate. This was my real home, my fortress. At the end of the causeway lay a sprawling, ultra-modern villa, a masterpiece of glass, concrete, and steel cantilevered over the edge of a private quay. This was the place Leo and Chloe had no idea existed. I'd spent 5 years and $56 million building it as my ultimate sanctuary, a strategic base of operations with its own power, its own water purification, and a communication system that could rival the Pentagon's. The moment I stepped out of the car and into the clean, salt-tinned air, the last of the grief fog burned away, replaced by the cold, clean air of strategy. The interior was minimalist and precise. The floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the Atlantic Ocean, a vast, blue expanse of possibility. My first and only call was to Marcus Thorne. He's been my lawyer for 40 years, a sharp, old-school attorney who still believed a man's word was his bond, but also believed in notarizing that bond and filing it in triplicate. He answered on the second ring. Arthur, I was wondering when you sit to call. Marcus, I have a situation. I read the tea leaves, he said, his voice grim. Give me the address. He arrived in under an hour, his ancient but immaculate Lincoln Town car pulling up silently. He walked in carrying a worn leather briefcase that I knew contained more corporate secrets than the entire SEC. I didn't waste time with pleasantries. I poured 2 glasses of whiskey, and as we stood at the massive marble island in the kitchen, I laid it all out. The Father's Day dinner, the document, the lockout, the total brutal efficiency of the coup. Marcus listened patiently, his expression unreadable. When I finished, he took a slow sip of his whiskey. Then for the first time, a thin, dangerous smile touched his lips. So the prince has seized the castle walls, he said. A classic, foolish mistake. He thinks Westwood Properties is the kingdom, I said, looking out at the endless ocean. He doesn't know it's just a branch on a much larger tree. He never bothered to read the fine print, Marcus said, snapping open his briefcase. He pulled out a tablet and swiped the screen, bringing up a complex corporate schematic. Allow me to reacquaint you with your life Septa's work, Arthur. He pointed a finger at a box in the center of the screen labeled Westwood Properties. This is what Leo controls: the operating company, the employees, the office leases, the day-to-day accounts. A formidable machine, to be sure. Then he tapped a box high above it, connected by a single solid line. And this, he said, his voice filled with satisfaction, is Orion Holdings. Orion Holdings. The parent company I had established 30 years ago, a silent, unmovable titan that Leo had either forgotten about or, more likely, never been smart enough to understand. Orion. I explained, though Marcus knew this better than anyone, owns 100% of Westwood. It owns this villa. It owns the land under the Westwood Tower. It owns the patents on our construction techniques. And most importantly, Orion Holdings is Westwood's biggest creditor. Leo's in charge of the tenants, but I, Arthur, am his landlord and his banker. Leo's name was on nothing that truly mattered. Our first move is to gather intelligence, Marcus said, shifting into business mode. We hire a top-tier private investigator to get eyes on Chloe, and we hire the best forensic accountant in the state to dig into Westwood's books. Leo is arrogant. He'll be making mistakes, getting sloppy. We need to document it all. He packed his tablet away, but paused with his hand on the briefcase. And Leo has forgotten about the bylaws, he said, a glint in his eye. The ironclad ones we wrote back in '95. The charter for Orion Holdings mandates an annual shareholder meeting. It's unavoidable, set for the same day every year, August 15th. And only you, as the 95% majority shareholder, can set the agenda and control the vote. August 15th. I had a deadline, a kill date. After Marcus left, I stood on the balcony, watching the sun dip toward the horizon. The game had been set. My son thought he was a king who had just conquered a castle. He was about to find out he was nothing but a pawn on a board he never even knew existed. The hunt had begun. My son had always viewed my empire as an infinite river of cash, a force of nature that would flow into his life forever without effort or question. It was time to remind him who controlled the dam. The 2 weeks that followed my retreat to the villa were the quietest yet most intense of my life. The sprawling home ceased to be a sanctuary and transformed into a command center. I spent my days in a glass-walled office overlooking the Atlantic, the calm blue of the ocean a stark contrast to the storm I was about to unleash. On a set of encrypted monitors, I coordinated with Marcus, a private investigator named Sullivan who specialized in sensitive domestic and corporate matters, and a forensic accountant named Elena who could find a single fraudulent dollar in a mountain of transactions. The first reports arrived on a Tuesday morning, exactly 14 days after the Father's Day dinner. Elena's report came first, a precise, bloodless digital document that detailed the financial hemorrhaging at Westwood. To an outsider, it was just numbers and charts. To me, it was a diary of my son's disrespect. He was using Westwood's operating accounts as a slush fund for a series of his own high-risk, high-leverage side ventures in tech and crypto. He was essentially gambling with my retirement, my legacy, funneling hundreds of thousands of dollars into shell LLCs that I'd never even heard of. He hadn't just tried to steal the company, he had already started gutting it from the inside. Sullivan's report on Chloe arrived an hour later. It was far more sordid. The file was a meticulously compiled dossier of her life, paid for by my company. There were photographs of her on shopping sprees, geotagged social media posts from lunches that lasted 4 hours, and copies of her corporate expense reports. My eyes landed on one particular document, a hotel folio from a 5-star resort in the Grenadines. The dates coincided with a week. Leo was supposedly at a construction conference in Chicago. Chloe's trip was coded as a corporate leadership offsite and wellness retreat. The total bill charged to her Westwood-issued American Express Platinum card was $22,400. I scanned the itemized list, my anger growing with each line. Private oceanfront villa, daily champagne service, deep tissue couples massage. It wasn't just theft. It was the brazen arrogance of it that made my blood run cold. That was it. I had the proof. The pattern of mismanagement, embezzlement, and outright fraud, was clear and undeniable. The time for observation was over. It was time to act. My first move was surgical and devastating. I called Marcus. It's time to call in the note, Marcus, the big one. I heard him shuffle some papers. The $15 million intercompany loan from Orion to Westwood, the one we structured for tax purposes a decade ago? The very one, I said. Standard terms. Payment due in 30 days. There was a pause, and I could almost hear him smiling. That will create a significant liquidity event, he said with profound understatement. The letter is on its way, Arthur. It will be on his desk by noon. That letter, arriving via a stern-faced courier, would be a bomb landing in the middle of Leo's stolen kingdom. He would have no way to pay it. Westwood's cash reserves had been depleted by his and Chloe's spending, and without my personal backing, no bank would extend him that kind of credit. My second move was far more personal. I spent an hour on the phone with senior vice presidents at 3 different banks, men I'd been doing business with for decades. With a calm, polite, and unbreakable resolve, I revoked my personal guarantees on every line of credit and every corporate credit card associated with Westwood Properties. The last call was to American Express. I gave them the account number for the corporate platinum program and instructed them to cancel one card immediately. I read the 16-digit number from the copy of Chloe's hotel receipt. The effect was almost instantaneous. Around 4 p.m., I received a one-line encrypted text from Sullivan, the PI, who had a man watching Chloe. It read, "Target attempted purchase at Bal Harbor Shops. Card declined. Subject is making a scene." I leaned back in my chair and looked out at the calm, endless ocean. The river had been dammed. The chaos was just beginning, and they had no idea where the drought was coming from. They were living in a house of cards built with my money. I hadn't knocked it over yet. I had simply pulled out the first few cards from the foundation, and now I could sit back and watch it start to wobble. When you apply pressure to a structure, you don't always see the damage on the surface, but deep within the foundation, the hairline fractures begin to spread. It had been a week since I'd dammed the river of cash, and from the quiet of my villa, I was monitoring the tremors running through my son's stolen kingdom. The reports I was getting were grimly satisfying. Westwood's accounts were in chaos. Key suppliers were demanding payment up front. Rumors were flying. Leo was in a constant state of panicked firefighting, lurching from one crisis to the next, completely blind to the invisible hand causing it all. He was so busy plugging holes in the hull that he never thought to look for the torpedoes in the water. The real bombshell arrived on a sweltering Monday afternoon. My PI, Sullivan, sent a terse, encrypted message. Have substantive intel. Audio component. Recommend in-person brief. An hour later, he was in my office, a thin, unassuming man who radiated a quiet competence. He placed a single, sealed manila envelope on my desk. His desperation is making him sloppy, Sullivan said. He steps trying to liquidate assets to generate cash, quietly. Inside the envelope was a report that made my blood run cold. For the past month, Leo had been in secret negotiations to sell the Biscayne Tower, one of our prime flagship properties, to a direct competitor, Concordia Developments. The proposed sale price was a full 30% below market value, a fire sale price that screamed desperation. But it was the second half of the report that made me feel the rage physically, like a hot spike in my chest. Sullivan had acquired audio recordings of Leo's last meeting with Concordia's CEO. I put in a single earbud. The sounds of my son's betrayal piped directly into my brain. The audio was crystal clear. First, I heard him justifying the low price, spinning a web of lies about market downturns and structural issues. Then came the true treason. I heard Leo discuss his finder's fee, a 7-figure kickback, $2 million. To be precise, to be wired directly to a numbered shell corporation in the Cayman Islands. He wasn't just mismanaging the company, he was actively gutting it for parts, selling our crown jewels to a rival for a fraction of their worth, just to line his own pockets. But the final part of the recording was what truly broke something inside me. The CEO of Concordia asked about my involvement. I heard Leo laugh, a short, dismissive sound. "Don't worry about my father. he said, his voice slick with condescension. The old man's health is failing. He's not all there anymore. The August board meeting is just a formality. His retirement party, we're just letting him think he still has a say. It's cleaner that way. The old man's health is failing. He was painting me as a senile, doddering fool to justify his theft. In that moment, any lingering trace of paternal sentiment I had for him evaporated. This wasn't a son making a mistake. This was an enemy combatant, and he had just handed me all the ammunition I would ever need. I didn't yell, I didn't throw anything. A profound icy calm settled over me. I looked at Sullivan. You've done excellent work. Continue your surveillance. After he left, I picked up the phone and called Marcus. I relayed the details of the report and the recording. He was silent for a long moment, the only sound his slow, steady breathing. This is no longer just a corporate dispute, Arthur, he finally said, his voice hard as iron. This is felony fraud. I know, I replied, but we're not going to the authorities. Not yet. We're going to handle this ourselves. Marcus, I need you to place one phone call to Richard Vance at Concordia Developments. My instructions were simple, precise, and devastating. Marcus was not to threaten or accuse. He was simply to introduce himself as general counsel for Orion Holdings. He was to inform Mr. Vance, as a professional courtesy, that Orion was the sole legal title holder of the Biscayne Tower, and that no sale had been authorized. He was to suggest that Mr. Vance have his own legal team verify the title records, and to state that any further attempts to purchase the asset from a subsidiary party would be met with swift and severe legal action. Marcus made the call. 10 minutes later, he called me back. It is done, he said. Mr. Vance was speechless. I believe the deal has evaporated. I leaned back, picturing the sequence of events. The panicked call from Vance to his lawyers. The frantic 2-minute title search confirming my ownership. And then the apoplectic, screaming phone call from Vance to Leo, demanding to know what kind of game he was playing. Leo's $2 million lifeline had just been severed. He'd been exposed as a powerless fraud to a major industry rival, and he was still completely in the dark. A blind man being punched by a ghost. He was a general fighting a war against an invisible army, launching attacks in the dark. He had no idea that I controlled the entire battlefield, the weather, and all the supply lines. And the real storm hadn't even started yet. There's a saying in structural engineering that every material has a breaking point. Under enough sustained pressure, even the strongest steel will fracture and fail. For my son and his wife, whose alliance was forged not in love but in mutual greed, that breaking point was rapidly approaching. The pressure I was applying from the shadows was becoming relentless, and the cracks were beginning to show. Leo's voicemails started a few days after the Concordia deal imploded. At first they were filled with impotent rage. Blustery, arrogant tirades where he accused me of playing games and messing with things I didn't understand. I deleted those without a second thought. But as the days bled into weeks and the financial drought worsened, the tone of the messages began to shift. The anger dissolved into a raw, panicked desperation that was almost pitiable. I saved one of them. I still have it. I listened to it last night, sitting on the balcony of the villa, the sea breeze cool against my skin. His voice on the recording is thin, strained, all the bluster gone. Dad, please, he begs. The word catching in his throat. Just talk to me. Someone is trying to destroy us. Our credit is frozen. The Concordia deal fell apart. It's a nightmare. I don't know who it is, but they're powerful. We need to fight them together. The irony was so thick I could taste it. He was a man trapped in a house that was on fire, and he was calling the arsonist to ask for help putting out the flames. The true sign of their collapse, however, came from Sullivan, my PI. He sent me one final audio file. It was a recording from a bug he'd placed in their car. It was priceless. In the recording, Chloe's voice is a shrill, hysterical shriek, the carefully constructed mask of the elegant socialite completely shattered. A washed-up old fool, she screams at him, the sound distorted with fury. You told me he was a washed-up old fool. You promised me this was ours. Now my cards are worthless. Your big deal is dead, and we suffer drowning. What did you do, Leo? What did you do? I could hear him stammering, trying to placate her, but she just steamrolled over him. Their partnership, built on the promise of my fortune, was fracturing under the weight of its absence. That recording was the final piece of the puzzle. That evening, I laid everything out on the massive granite dining table in the villa. It was a dossier of damnation. There was the forensic accountant's 300-page report, detailing every dollar Leo had funneled into his doomed side hustles. There was Sullivan's file on the attempted illegal sale of the Biscayne Tower, complete with transcripts of the kickback negotiations. And there was the small digital audio player containing the recordings of my son's desperation and my daughter-in-law's venomous rage. I had them. Cold. A grim sense of finality settled over me. There was no joy in this, no thrill of victory, just the somber necessity of excising a cancer. I picked up the phone. "Marcus," I said. "It best time. Send it." The next morning, a professional legal courier arrived at the Westwood Properties headquarters. He delivered a single heavy vellum envelope to Leo's office, requiring his personal signature upon receipt. It was not from me. It was from the office of the Board of Orion Holdings. Inside was a formal, legally binding summons. It was a notice for the annual shareholder meeting to be held at 10 a.m. on August 15th in the main boardroom of the Westwood Tower. The agenda listed was deceptively simple, almost mundane. Item 1, a review of corporate leadership. Item 2, a vote on the strategic allocation of corporate assets. I pictured him reading it. I could see the flicker of confusion at the unfamiliar Orion Holdings letterhead, followed by the slow dawn of arrogant comprehension. This was it. The old man was finally waving the white flag. The retirement party he had promised his co-conspirators was finally happening. He would see the summons not as a threat, but as an invitation to his own coronation. He would walk into that boardroom on August 15th, expecting to be handed a crown. He had no idea he was walking to the gallows. Some days are for building, others are for demolition. On the morning of August 15th, I woke before the dawn, the sky outside my villa a pale, bruised purple. I knew that before the sun set I would have to tear down a part of my own life in order to save the rest of it. I chose my suit with the care of a general choosing his armor, a dark navy wool, conservative and powerful. As I drove into Miami, the city I had helped shape, it felt like I was seeing it for the first time again, a landscape of possibilities I was now fighting to reclaim. I walked into the lobby of the Westwood Tower at precisely 9:45 a.m. The security guards at the main desk were new, hired by Leo. They didn't recognize me, and one of them moved to intercept me. I didn't break my stride. I simply looked at him, and he hesitated, a flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. In that moment he must have seen something in my face. Not a former employee, but the man who had laid the foundation of the very building he was standing in. He stepped aside. The boardroom on the 40th floor was just as I remembered it, a long mahogany table polished to a mirror shine, with a panoramic view of the bay. The board members were already seated, a collection of men and women I had known for years. Some looked uncomfortable, avoiding my eyes. Others gave me tight, sympathetic smiles, and at the head of the table, in the chairman's seat, my seat, sat Leo. He was the picture of smug triumph, wearing an ostentatiously expensive suit, his smile wide and confident. He looked like a boy playing dress-up in his father's office, completely oblivious to the fact that the real owner had just walked in the door. He stood up, tapping a pen on his water glass to call the room to order. "Good morning, everyone," he began, his voice booming with false confidence. "I'm glad we could all be here. As you know, we're here today to formalize the next chapter for Westwood Properties. I want to start by honoring the incredible legacy my father Arthur has built." He gestured toward me, a magnanimous, patronizing smile on his face. "We all owe him a great debt, and I, for one, am particularly grateful for his wisdom in knowing when it's time to pass the torch. As he transitions into a well-deserved retirement, I am humbled to carry that legacy into a bold new future." I let him talk. I let him spin his web of lies, speaking of a smooth transition and a new vision. I watched him dig his own grave with a silver shovel, the board members shifting uncomfortably, myself remaining as still and silent as a statue. He was just winding down, a self-satisfied smirk on his face, when he finally paused to take a breath. In the ringing silence, I cleared my throat. The small sound cut through the room like a gunshot. Every eye snapped to me. An impressive vision, Leo. I said, my voice calm, quiet, and utterly commanding. But you've convened the wrong meeting. Leo Sepp's smile faltered. Dad, what are you talking about? This isn't a Westwood Properties meeting, I said, cutting him off cleanly. I nodded to Marcus, who stood, and with quiet efficiency placed a thick, leather-bound folder in front of each board member. This is the legally mandated annual shareholder meeting for Orion Holdings, the company that owns Westwood Properties, this building, and every desk you're sitting at. The color drained from Leo's face. He looked down at the folder in front of him, his hands trembling slightly as he opened it. The cover page was a simple title, Orion Holdings, Annual Review. He looked up at me, his eyes wide with a dawning, horrified understanding. He was trapped. For the next 20 minutes, I systematically dismantled him. I was no longer a father, I was a prosecutor. On the room's main screen, I projected the forensic accountant's report. Let's begin with the financials, I said. Over the last quarter, Mr. Cole has diverted over $3 million of company capital into a series of high-risk, unauthorized personal ventures held by Shell LLCs. I pointed to a chart showing the massive cash drain. This is not investment, it is theft. Next, the Biscayne Tower affair. As you know, I said, looking at a few specific board members, Leo was exploring a sale of the Biscayne Tower to Concordia Developments. He presented this to you as a strategic partnership. What he failed to mention was the $2 million kickback he personally negotiated to be paid to this offshore account. I put the details of the Cayman Islands Corporation on the screen. There were audible gasps. And finally, I said, clicking to a scan of the hotel receipt, the matter of executive malfeasance, a $22,400 spa retreat for Chloe Cole fraudulently billed to the company. Leo finally snapped. He shot to his feet, his face a mask of purple rage. He laughed, a high, brittle sound. This is absurd, this is slander, he shouted, pointing a shaking finger at me. My father, as I mentioned, has not been well. He's been confused. Someone has clearly taken advantage of him to produce this work of fiction. He turned to the board, his arms spread wide, pleading, you all know me. You know the work I've done. Are you really going to believe this fantasy from a man who hasn't been in his own office for 2 months? When he saw the stony, unconvinced faces, his desperation curdled into pure venom. He turned his full attention back to me. You could never stand it, could you? He spat, his voice cracking. You couldn't handle that I was finally taking this company to places you were too old and too scared to go. You were always jealous of me, of my vision, so you invent this pathetic conspiracy to tear me down because you can't bear to become irrelevant. His ugly words hung in the air. I let the silence stretch, his accusations echoing in the vast, quiet room. I didn't respond to him. His tantrum was meaningless. My gaze swept across the faces of the board members, and then I nodded to Marcus. I believe the evidence speaks for itself, I said calmly. As per Section 9 of the Orion Holdings corporate bylaws, I am now calling for a shareholder vote. A motion of no confidence in the sitting president of our subsidiary, Mr. Leo Cole, effective immediately. The fight went out of Leo as if a string had been cut. He collapsed back into his chair, the outburst having cost him everything. He was just a hollowed-out man in an expensive suit. Marcus conducted the vote. It was, of course, unanimous. The room was silent. I stood up and walked to the head of the table. I looked my son directly in the eye. The smug usurper was gone, replaced by a terrified, broken animal. Leo, I said, my voice devoid of all emotion. You're fired. Security will escort you from the premises. As 2 uniformed guards entered the room, he didn't even have the energy to protest. He just stared at me, his face a mixture of hatred and utter disbelief. As they led him away, his face contorted in a mask of impotent fury, I felt a sharp, unexpected pang in my chest. It wasn't victory. It was loss. For a fleeting second, I didn't see the greedy stranger he had become. I saw the little 6-year-old boy whose height I used to mark on the doorframe beaming with pride. Was any part of that boy left? I had to believe there wasn't, because the man I had just fired, the man I had to destroy to save my life's work, was someone I didn't know at all. The silence in the boardroom after they took him away was heavier than all the shouting that came before it. The board members sat stunned, avoiding my eyes, unsure of what to do next. But I wasn't in that room anymore. For a split second, my mind transported me back 33 years to the sun-drenched backyard of the old house in Coral Gables. It was Leo's 5th birthday party. I could smell the hot dogs on the grill, hear the laughter of the other children. I saw with perfect clarity the look on his face when I gave him his first real baseball glove, a miniature Wilson smelling of rich new leather. The look he gave me was one of pure, uncomplicated adoration. He was my son, and in that moment I was his entire world. The memory was a quick, sharp pain, a ghost of a boy who no longer existed. I pushed it aside with a force of will that had taken me a lifetime to build. There was work to do. The emotional battle was over. The logistical one was just beginning. A few days later, the final, pathetic firework of this whole affair fizzled out in my lobby. I was back in my office, the real one at the head of the top floor, being briefed by the interim COO I'd just appointed, when my assistant buzzed me on the intercom. Her voice was flustered. "Mr. Cole, I'm very sorry to disturb you, but there's a situation in the lobby. It's Chloe Cole. She's demanding to see you." I swiveled my chair to face the monitor that displayed the building's security feeds. "Put the lobby camera on screen," I said calmly. There she was. But this wasn't the hysterical woman from the audio recordings. This was a calculated performance. Dressed in an elegant, sober black dress, she stood speaking to the head of security, her face a mask of practiced concern. "Please," I heard her say through the audio feed, her voice soft and laced with false sympathy. "Just tell Arthur I'm here. I'm worried sick about him. He's not himself. He's under so much stress. This whole thing with Leo, it's a terrible misunderstanding. I know he needs me right now, even if he won't admit it. I can help him fix this." I watched, cold and unmoved. It was a masterful little play, the loving daughter-in-law trying to mend the family her own greed had shattered. She was trying to manipulate her way past the gatekeepers, to get into my office for one last chance to sink her claws in. The head of security, a man I had personally hired years ago, was unflappable. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Cole," he said, his voice polite but firm as granite. "Mr. Cole is not available." She tried again, placing a hand on his arm. "But he doesn't understand. Mr. Cole is not available," he repeated, his tone leaving no room for negotiation. And that was it. The moment she knew her final tactic, her manipulation, had failed. The mask didn't just slip, it shattered into a million pieces. Her face contorted, the soft lines of concern hardening into a snarl of pure rage. "You tell him he can't do this," she began, her voice rising to a shrill shriek that echoed in the vast marble-clad space. "This is my company, too. I have rights." Then, as if sensing she was being watched, she looked directly up at one of the security cameras, her eyes boring into the lens. "You hear me, Arthur?" she shrieked. "You couldn't stand to see him be better than you. You are a jealous, bitter old man, and he'll die alone." Just then the elevator doors opened, and Marcus stepped out. He walked toward her with the unhurried calm of a man who held all the cards. He simply stood before her, a silent, immovable object, until her tirade ran out of steam and she was left panting, her expensive dress looking like a costume on a mad woman. Then he opened a folder and presented her with 2 documents. From my high-definition monitor, I could see them clearly. The first was a copy of the prenuptial agreement she had signed 10 years ago, the one her own high-priced lawyer had advised her was ironclad. The second was a freshly executed restraining order. Her face went from red to a pasty white. The fight drained out of her in an instant. Her last stand wasn't a roar, it was a pathetic, whimpering defeat. She snatched the papers and fled. A week later, I received a short, formal email from Marcus. Leo had officially filed for divorce. Chloe's chapter was over. That afternoon, I met with Marcus in the boardroom. I want it all back, Marcus, I said. File the civil suit against both of them. We have the evidence. This isn't about punishment, I clarified. This is about accountability. This company was my retirement. It was my pension, but it was also the livelihood of hundreds of employees whose jobs they put at risk. It was the trust of our partners they lied to. They lit a match in a forest I spent 40 years planting, and they will pay for every last acre of the damages. Marcus closed his notebook. Consider it done, he said. As he left, I looked out the window at the sprawling city below. The emotional war was over. The messy, public confrontations were finished. Now came the cold, methodical work of calculating the damages and sending the bill. In the weeks that followed the boardroom ambush and Chloe's pathetic exit, an unnatural quiet descended. The legal machinery was in motion. The civil suits filed, the company's restructuring underway. But in the late hours at the villa, with only the sound of the ocean for company, the emotional dust began to settle. I found myself standing on the balcony, looking out at the dark water, wrestling with the ghost of the question that remained. Was there another way? Could I have saved him from Chloe, from his own worst impulses? Was there some magic set of words I could have said at that Father's Day dinner that would have brought back the boy who loved baseball gloves? The thought of forgiveness felt like a foreign country for which I had no passport. Forgiveness requires remorse, and the son I had banished from my life had shown none. He had only shown greed, rage, and a bottomless capacity for self-pity. I came to a hard, cold conclusion under the silent stars. You cannot save someone who has no desire to be saved. The only path forward was not to look back. The only way to build again was on a clean foundation. 3 months passed. Autumn settled over Miami, bringing a crisp clarity that matched my own state of mind. The chaos was a distant memory. In its place was a quiet, focused period of rebuilding. I was in the main boardroom with Marcus, signing the final documents that would officially dissolve the Westwood Properties brand. The name was too tainted, a monument to a failed legacy. We were absorbing all its assets directly under the Orion Holdings umbrella. The company was already healthier. Morale was up. The balance sheets were stronger than they'd been in years. It felt like a necessary purification. As we were finishing, my assistant brought in the afternoon mail. Among the reports was a single white personal envelope. I recognized Leo's jagged handwriting instantly. My heart gave a single hard thump. After all my reflection, here was a message from the ghost himself. I felt a foolish, treacherous flicker of hope. Maybe 3 months of exile had brought clarity. Maybe this was the remorse I had deemed impossible. Marcus saw my expression and discreetly gathered his papers to give me a moment. I slit the envelope open. It was 2 pages, handwritten, from the very first sentence. My hope turned to ash. It wasn't an apology. It was a venomous, self-pitying rant. It was a detailed accounting of his own victimhood, a screed filled with accusations and blame. He wrote about how I had stolen his future, how I had been jealous of his vision, how I had ruthlessly destroyed him out of spite. He called me a monster, a tyrant, a lonely old man who would die with nothing but his money. This letter was the final answer to the question I had asked myself on the balcony weeks ago. The old wound ached, but only for a moment. This was the final proof. The man I had raised was gone. This bitter, entitled stranger was all that was left. I stood up, walked over to the large, industrial-grade office shredder, and fed the letter into the slot. The machine whirred to life, its steel teeth catching the paper. I watched as my son's furious, hateful words were turned into a cascade of meaningless confetti. It was a quiet, anticlimactic, and deeply final act of closure. The door was now locked. I stood at the great window of my office, looking down at the city. Justice, I realized, was never about destroying him. It was about protecting what I had built and drawing a firm, absolute boundary. His life was his own to live now, and his failures were his own to carry. That thought led me to one final piece of unresolved business. The old house in Coral Gables. It needed a new purpose. A new idea, clean and powerful, took shape. I buzzed my assistant. Ask Marcus to come back in, please. When he returned, I had a new energy. Marcus, I said, I know what to do with the house. I laid out the plan for the Cole Foundation for Architecture and Engineering. I would donate the house as its headquarters, along with a $20 million endowment. Its mission would be to find kids who were like I had been, kids with nothing but a fire in their belly and a desire to build, and give them the chance I never had. Full scholarships, mentorships, a real future. My first legacy, the one I had tried to build for my son, had crumbled into dust. My new legacy would be built from its very bricks, a foundation of opportunity for strangers, and somehow it felt infinitely stronger. Christmas is a few weeks away. From the balcony of the villa, the setting sun looks like a smear of gold on the horizon, and for the first time in a long time, the quiet feels like peace, not absence. My days have found a new rhythm, one set by the tides in the markets, not by anger or obligation. Under the Orion Holdings banner, the business is thriving with a renewed sense of purpose. But my real work, my new work, is the foundation. Last week, I received the files for the first 3 scholarship recipients. I spent an entire afternoon reading them. One was a girl from a tenement in Hialeah who wrote with a fiery passion about designing hurricane-proof bridges. She reminded me of myself at 18, nothing but a fire in her belly and a hunger to build something that would last. I approved her scholarship personally. My life is in order. Sometimes a thought of Leo still surfaces, a ghost of a memory carried in on the sea breeze. It no longer brings that sharp, debilitating pain. I've come to accept it as a scar, a part of my own landscape now. It's a reminder not of the wound, but of the fact that I survived it. It's a hard truth that sometimes the only way to save yourself is to be willing to lose what you thought you couldn't live without. That evening, I walked out to the stone fire pit that overlooks the ocean. The air was cool, and the flames crackled, sending sparks up into the darkening, star-filled sky. I went back inside for a moment, and returned with the dark blue leather folder from that Father's Day dinner. I'd kept it in my desk drawer, the last toxic artifact from a buried life. I held it in my hands one last time, the leather cool against my skin. This object was supposed to be my life's undoing, the contract for my own erasure. I opened it and looked at the empty line where my signature was supposed to go. Then I closed the folder and dropped it into the heart of the fire. I watched the leather curl and blacken, the paper inside catching with a soft whoosh. It turned to glowing orange embers, then to gray ash, which the wind lifted and scattered into the night. It wasn't an act of hate, it was an act of release. I wasn't burning a memory. I was burning a future I had refused to accept. My life is quieter now, but it is entirely my own. I built an empire for a son who saw it only as his inheritance. Now I run it for a purpose that is mine alone. You learn late in life that some people aren't loyal to you. They are loyal to their need of you. Once their needs change, so does their loyalty. He didn't lose me. He gave me away.